The observation chamber hummed with soft blue light as Zektheri adjusted the neural interface connecting her mind to the monitoring systems. As a senior observer for the Galactic Council's Military Assessment Division, she had witnessed countless conflicts across the Spiral Arm. Wars between the crystalline Veltar and their silicon-based enemies. The 3-century struggle between the hive-minded Korth and the individualistic Fenari. Battles that reshaped entire star systems and left whole species extinct. But this assignment felt different. The humans were new to galactic warfare, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 3 standard years ago. Their homeworld, Earth, sat on the edge of Zephyrian territory, and recent intelligence suggested the Reptilian Empire was planning an invasion. The Council needed to understand human military capabilities before deciding whether to offer them protection or simply relocate their survivors after the inevitable conquest. Zektheri's 4 eyes focused on the holographic display showing the human fleet positioning itself around a moon called Luna. 23 vessels, primitive by galactic standards, arranged in what their military called a defensive formation. The largest ship, designated as their flagship, measured barely 800 meters. Most Council races considered anything under 2 kilometers a patrol craft. Beginning detailed observation, she spoke into the recording device. Human fleet consists of 23 vessels of varying sizes. No energy shields detected. No quantum displacement weapons observed. Kinetic projectiles and basic plasma cannons appear to be their primary armaments. The Zephyrian invasion force emerged from hyperspace like a metal storm. 300 warships, each one larger than the entire human fleet combined. Their battlecruisers stretched over 5 kilometers in length, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Behind them came the troop carriers, ready to deploy 100,000 soldiers onto Earth's surface. Zektheri expected the humans to retreat immediately. Every rational species did when faced with such overwhelming odds. The Fenari had negotiated surrender when facing similar numbers. The proud warrior culture of the militant Cax had asked for terms rather than face certain extinction. Instead, the human admiral opened a communication channel to the Zephyrian fleet commander. "This is Admiral Sarah Chan of the Earth Defense Force." The human's voice carried no fear, only cold determination. "You are in violation of our territorial space. Withdraw immediately or we will be forced to engage." Zektheri's translator implant nearly malfunctioned processing the message. The humans were threatening a force 15 times their size with weapons centuries ahead of their technology. Either they were completely insane, or they possessed some hidden capability her sensors couldn't detect. The Zephyrian commander, a battle-scarred veteran named Theskar, responded with what could only be described as amusement. "Primitive mammals, you have 2 choices. Surrender now and some of your species will survive as laborers. Resist and we will turn your planet into glass." Admiral Chen's reply came without hesitation. "Then you'll die trying." The first human ship to move was their flagship, the UES Defiance. It accelerated directly toward the center of the Zephyrian formation, followed by 6 smaller vessels. The remaining ships spread out in a pattern that made no tactical sense to Zektheri's military training. They were dividing their already insufficient firepower across multiple vectors. "Human tactical doctrine appears based on distributed engagement," she recorded. "This strategy typically results in piecemeal destruction when facing superior numbers. Estimated survival time, 14 minutes. The Zephyrians opened fire first, their plasma batteries lighting up space with deadly energy. The humans activated what Zektheri assumed were their shields, but her sensors detected no defensive energy fields. Instead, some kind of metallic chaff began deploying around their ships, creating interference clouds that disrupted targeting systems. Then, the human weapons opened fire and Zektheri realized she had been completely wrong about their capabilities. The projectiles that emerged from human ships weren't simple kinetic rounds. They were guided missiles, but not like any she'd seen before. These weapons accelerated continuously, reaching velocities that shouldn't have been possible with conventional propulsion. When they struck Zephyrian shields, they didn't just explode. They punched through the energy barriers like they didn't exist, detonating inside the protected hull space. The first Zephyrian cruiser to die took 12 hits in rapid succession. Each missile found a different critical system: power core, weapon batteries, navigation, life support. The ship didn't just explode. It was systematically dismantled in the space of 30 seconds. "Impossible," Zektheri whispered. her translation forgotten. Their weapons shouldn't be able to penetrate Zephyrian shielding. But they could, and they did. The human missiles used some kind of adaptive technology that analyzed energy field frequencies in real time, adjusting their own electromagnetic signature to slip through defensive barriers. It was brilliant, elegant, and completely unexpected from a species that had barely achieved interstellar travel. The Zephyrians responded by targeting the human flagship with concentrated fire from 20 ships simultaneously. Enough firepower to vaporize a small moon focused on a single 800-meter vessel. Zektheri was certain she was about to witness the end of human resistance. The Defiance vanished. Not destroyed, not disabled. Gone. One moment it was absorbing the full fury of the Zephyrian fleet, the next it had simply ceased to exist in that location. Zektheri's sensors showed it reappearing 3,000 kilometers away, completely undamaged, already firing on targets that had exposed their flanks while focusing on its previous position. Tactical displacement without hyperspace transition, she breathed. How are they accomplishing short-range teleportation? The answer came as she watched more human ships execute the same maneuver. They weren't using conventional displacement drives that required massive power cores and generated detectable dimensional distortions. Instead, they seemed to be folding spacetime on a localized level, creating temporary shortcuts that allowed instantaneous repositioning. The technology was beyond anything in the Council archives. The theoretical framework existed, but no species had ever developed practical applications. The power requirements should have been enormous, yet the human ships showed no signs of energy depletion. As the battle continued, Zektheri began to understand that everything the Council thought they knew about human capabilities was wrong. Their ships weren't primitive. They were designed with completely different priorities than standard galactic warships. Where other species focused on heavy armor and massive energy weapons, humans had created vessels optimized for speed, stealth, and precision strikes. A human destroyer, barely 200 meters long, eliminated an entire Zephyrian squadron by targeting their ammunition storage areas with surgical accuracy. The explosions created a chain reaction that took out 5 ships simultaneously. Another human vessel used its displacement drive to appear inside the Zephyrian formation, fired at point-blank range into unshielded rear sections, then vanished before return fire could be coordinated. The Zephyrian fleet, designed to overwhelm opponents through superior numbers and firepower, found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to engage on their terms. The humans used mobility and precision to turn every engagement into an ambush. They struck at weak points, eliminated key targets, and disappeared before facing retaliation. But what impressed Zektheri most wasn't their technology. It was their coordination. Every human ship moved as if controlled by a single mind, yet her sensors detected no centralized command network that could be disrupted. When she analyzed their communication patterns, she discovered something remarkable. The humans were sharing real-time tactical data through quantum-entangled communication links. Not just location and status updates, but complete sensory information from every ship simultaneously. Each human captain could see through the eyes of their entire fleet. They knew the exact position, status, and intentions of every friendly vessel at all times. When one ship identified a target, the optimal firing solution was instantly available to whichever vessel had the best attack angle. When damage occurred, support was already moving to compensate before the injured ship could even report the problem. The Zephyrians were fighting 23 individual ships. The humans were fighting as one organism with 23 bodies. Fleet coordination exceeds all known parameters, Zektheri recorded, her voice filled with growing amazement. Individual vessels operating as components of a distributed intelligence network. Command structure appears to be completely decentralized while maintaining perfect tactical cohesion. By the first hour of combat, the Zephyrians had lost 40 ships while the humans had suffered only minor damage to 3 vessels. Commander Theskar began withdrawing his forces to longer engagement ranges, hoping to use his superior firepower at distances where human mobility couldn't compensate. The humans followed them. Their ships accelerated past safe limits, their displacement drives allowing them to maintain contact even when conventional pursuit should have been impossible. Zephyrian vessels designed for long-range bombardment found themselves forced into close-quarters combat where human precision targeting and mobility gave them overwhelming advantages. Then, Zektheri witnessed something that would haunt her dreams for the rest of her life. A human ship designated UES Yorktown took critical damage when 3 Zephyrian cruisers focused their fire simultaneously. The vessel's hull cracked open, atmosphere venting into space, life support systems failing. Any reasonable commander would have ordered evacuation or retreat to save the crew. Instead, Captain Maria Santos opened a channel to the entire human fleet. "This is Yorktown. We're not going to make it." Her voice was calm, professional, accepting. "But we can take some of these bastards with us. All ships, clear the area. We're going to show them why you don't mess with Earth." The damaged destroyer accelerated toward the nearest Zephyrian battlecruiser, its displacement drive charging for one final jump. Not away from the enemy, but directly into their midst. Zektheri realized what was happening and tried to warn the Zephyrians, but human electronic warfare systems had been quietly infiltrating enemy communications for the past hour. Her transmission was blocked, scrambled, reduced to meaningless static. The Yorktown appeared inside the Zephyrian formation, specifically within the hangar bay of their largest battlecruiser. The human ship's fusion reactors overloaded simultaneously, creating a miniature star inside the enemy vessel. The explosion took out the battlecruiser, 2 nearby destroyers, and damaged for other ships so severely they were forced to withdraw. But that wasn't what made Zektheri's hands shake as she tried to process what she'd witnessed. It was the complete lack of hesitation from the other human crews. Captain Santos had just sacrificed herself and her entire crew to damage the enemy fleet. 300 human lives ended in an instant, and every other ship in the human formation acknowledged her decision with calm professionalism, immediately moving to exploit the tactical advantage her sacrifice had created. No species in the galactic community fought like this. When faced with certain death, rational beings negotiated, retreated, or simply surrendered. They didn't turn themselves into weapons and smile while doing it. "Human psychological profile requires complete revision," she whispered into her recorder. "Species demonstrates willingness to accept total loss of individual lives for strategic advantage. No survival instinct override observed when unit effectiveness is maintained." The battle raged for 6 more hours. The Zephyrians threw everything they had at the human fleet, calling in reinforcements, deploying experimental weapons, even attempting to ram the smaller human ships with their massive cruisers. Nothing worked. Every tactic they tried was anticipated, countered, turned against them. When the Zephyrian commander finally ordered a full retreat, his invasion force had been reduced from 300 ships to 67 barely functional vessels. The humans had lost exactly 4 ships, each one sacrificed in a calculated exchange that eliminated far more valuable enemy assets. Admiral Chun opened a final communication channel as the surviving Zephyrians limped back toward hyperspace. "Tell your government that Earth is under human protection now," she said. "Any future aggression against our world or our people will be met with total retaliation. We don't negotiate with slavers, and we don't show mercy to those who threaten our families." As the Zephyrian fleet disappeared into hyperspace, carrying news of their devastating defeat back to their empire, Zektheri began compiling her report for the Galactic Council. But how could she explain what she'd witnessed? How could she make them understand that humanity wasn't just another spacefaring species, but something completely unprecedented in galactic history? She started with the technical specifications. Human ships that could fold spacetime, weapons that adapted to any defense, communication systems that created perfect tactical coordination across entire fleets. But the numbers and capabilities, impressive as they were, couldn't capture the truth of what made humans dangerous. It was their mentality, their complete, unwavering commitment to victory regardless of personal cost. The way they treated individual lives as acceptable losses if the overall mission could be accomplished. The calm professionalism with which they planned and executed suicide attacks that would break the spirit of any other species. "Recommendation for Council consideration," she spoke into her final log entry. "Humanity should be offered immediate membership in the Galactic Alliance with full military partnership rights. Under no circumstances should any member species consider aggressive action against human territory. This species represents a fundamental evolution in warfare doctrine that makes conventional military thinking obsolete." She paused, looking at the tactical recordings of the battle one more time. 23 primitive ships had defeated 15 times their number of advanced warships through nothing but superior coordination, innovative technology, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. "Personal note," she added quietly. "I was commanded to observe humans at war. I have completed this assignment. I now request immediate transfer to any posting that will not require further interaction with this species. What I have witnessed here changes everything we thought we knew about military science, tactical doctrine, and the fundamental nature of intelligent life in combat situations. Zektheri disconnected from the monitoring system and began the long journey back to Council space. Behind her, the human fleet regrouped around their homeworld, already preparing for the next threat that would inevitably come. Because if there was one thing she'd learned about humans, it was that they never stopped fighting. They just got better at it. 3 months after submitting her initial report, Zektheri found herself back in an observation post, watching human forces in action despite her explicit request for transfer. The Council had denied her reassignment with a simple explanation. She was now the galaxy's leading expert on human military doctrine, and her continued observations were essential for galactic security. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd asked to never see humans fight again, and now she was required to study nothing but human conflicts. This time, the setting was different. The humans weren't defending their homeworld against overwhelming odds. Instead, they were conducting what they called a peacekeeping operation in the Centauri sector, where the insectoid Hivenesh had been systematically enslaving smaller species and harvesting their worlds for biomass. The Galactic Council had debated intervention for 30 years without reaching a consensus. The Hivenesh possessed powerful defensive fleets and had made it clear they would fight to extinction rather than abandon their expansion. Most Council races agreed that stopping them would require unacceptable casualties, so they'd settled for containing the threat and accepting that several minor civilizations would be consumed. The humans had listened to exactly 15 minutes of Council debate before Admiral Chun stood up and made their position clear. "We don't negotiate with slavers," she'd said, "and we don't abandon innocent people to monsters because fighting back might be expensive." 48 hours later, a human task force was en route to the Centauri sector. Zektheri watched their approach through deep space monitoring arrays, noting the changes in human fleet composition since the Zephyrian conflict. Their ships were larger now, more heavily armed, but still retained the distinctive design philosophy that prioritized speed and precision over brute force. More importantly, they'd incorporated lessons learned from their previous engagement. The task force numbered 60 ships, more than twice the size of the Earth Defense Force that had defeated the Zephyrians. But these weren't just enlarged versions of existing designs. Human military engineers had been busy developing entirely new classes of vessels specifically for offensive operations. At the center of the formation flew something the humans designated as a strategic command carrier. Nearly 2 kilometers long, it looked more like a mobile space station than a warship. Instead of heavy weapons, its hull bristled with communication arrays, sensor clusters, and launch bays for smaller craft. Beginning observation log, Day 73 post-Zephyrian incident, Zektheri recorded. Human fleet composition shows significant evolution in ship design and tactical doctrine. Primary vessel appears focused on command and control rather than direct combat capability. The Hivenesh had fortified the Centauri system extensively. Orbital defense platforms surrounded every inhabited world. Minefields created deadly barriers at the edge of the system. Patrol fleets numbering in the hundreds maintained constant vigil against intruders. Any conventional assault would face weeks of grinding warfare against prepared positions. The humans bypassed all of it. Their fleet emerged from hyperspace not at the system's edge, but directly within the inner planet's orbital zone. Somehow, they'd calculated jump coordinates that placed them past the outer defenses, inside the Hivenesh defensive perimeter. The displacement technology Zektheri had observed in their previous battle had apparently been scaled up for strategic applications. The Hivenesh responded with characteristic efficiency. Within minutes, every mobile asset in the system was converging on the human position. Over 800 ships, ranging from patrol corvettes to massive hive ships capable of housing millions of individuals. The insects had numerical superiority by more than 10 to 1, and they were fighting in their own prepared territory. But Admiral Chun wasn't interested in a conventional fleet engagement. All civilian populations in this system are under human protection effective immediately. Her broadcast went out on every frequency. Any Hivenesh forces that surrender will be treated according to galactic law. Any forces that continue hostile operations will be eliminated. The Hivenesh Queen Admiral's response was predictable. The insectoids didn't recognize concepts like surrender or mercy. Their biology made negotiation impossible. They could only expand or die, consume or starve. The massive alien fleet accelerated toward the human position with the single-minded determination of a species that had conquered 40 worlds. Then, the humans revealed what they'd really been building during the past 3 months. The strategic command carrier's launch bays opened, disgorging hundreds of objects that were too small to be ships and too large to be conventional missiles. Zektheri sensors classified them as autonomous drones, each one roughly the size of a human fighter craft but operating without life support systems or human crews. Unmanned combat units deployed, she recorded. Estimate 400 individual platforms launched from carrier vessel. No biological signatures detected, fully automated systems. But calling them drones didn't begin to describe what Zektheri was witnessing. Each unit moved with perfect coordination, not just with its immediate neighbors but with the entire swarm. They flowed around obstacles like water, concentrated firepower like a focus beam, and dispersed to avoid retaliation like smoke in the wind. More disturbing was their tactical intelligence. The drones didn't just respond to current threats, they anticipated future ones. When Hive-Nest ships moved to intercept them, the automated units were already repositioning to exploit the gap such movement would create. They fought like they could see several moves ahead in a chess game that spanned an entire star system. The first wave of Hive-Nest interceptors met the drone swarm at the edge of the fourth planet's gravity well. The insects expected a conventional engagement where superior numbers would eventually overwhelm the smaller human force. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that treated individual losses as completely irrelevant. When Hive-Nest fighters destroyed a drone, 3 more immediately moved to fill its position. When they focused fire to eliminate multiple units simultaneously, the swarm simply reconfigured itself around the losses and continued its mission without pause. The automated systems had no survival instinct, no fear of death, no emotional response to casualties. They existed only to complete their assigned objectives. Zektheri watched in fascination as the human drones began employing suicide tactics that would have been unthinkable for crewed vessels. Individual units would accelerate to maximum velocity and ram critical systems on larger ships, trading themselves for strategic targets. Others would allow themselves to be captured by Hive-Nest tractor beams, then detonate once they were pulled inside enemy hangar bays. Human automation removes psychological barriers to acceptable loss ratios, she noted. Individual platforms operating as expendable components of larger tactical system. No preservation protocols observed for individual units. The Hive-Nest, despite their reputation for ruthless efficiency, found themselves psychologically overwhelmed by an enemy that was even more coldly logical than they were. The insects were driven by biological imperatives to expand and consume, but they still valued the survival of their individual hive ships. The human drones valued nothing except mission completion. Within the first hour of combat, the drone swarm had eliminated over half the Hive-Nest interceptor force while losing barely 30 units. But that was just the preliminary engagement. The real battle began when the human capital ships entered the fight. The 60 crewed vessels that had seemed almost insignificant compared to the massive Hive-Nest fleet revealed their true purpose. They weren't designed to engage enemy ships directly. Instead, they served as mobile command centers for the drone swarms, coordination nodes that directed the automated units with superhuman precision and speed. Each human ship controlled approximately 50 drones through quantum-entangled communication links. The combination of human creativity and tactical insight with machine precision and reaction time created a hybrid intelligence that operated far beyond the capabilities of either component alone. Admiral Chen's flagship, the UES Retribution, positioned itself at the center of the formation and began coordinating what could only be described as a 3-dimensional chess match played with thousands of pieces across millions of cubic kilometers of space. Hive-Nest forces found themselves constantly outmaneuvered by an enemy that seemed to predict their every move. When they concentrated their fleet to overwhelm a specific position, human forces had already repositioned to exploit the weakened areas their concentration created. When they dispersed to prevent such exploitation, coordinated strikes eliminated key vessels before defensive support could respond. The battle became a masterclass in military efficiency. Human forces struck at communication nodes, severing Hive-Nest coordination. They targeted supply vessels, starving frontline units of ammunition and fuel. They eliminated command ships, creating confusion and conflicting orders throughout the enemy fleet. But, most importantly, They demonstrated something that terrified Zektheri more than any weapon or tactic she'd observed. The humans were learning. Each engagement taught them something new about HFY capabilities and weaknesses. Their quantum communication network allowed real-time sharing of tactical data across the entire fleet, which meant every lesson learned by one ship was immediately available to all others. When a drone discovered an effective attack pattern against HFY shields, every other unit in the swarm instantly knew how to replicate it. More disturbing was their ability to extrapolate from limited data. Human commanders observed how the insects responded to specific threats, then developed countermeasures for tactics the HFY hadn't even used yet. They were fighting the current battle while simultaneously preparing for the next 3 engagements. Human learning curve exceeds all theoretical parameters, Zektheri recorded, her voice tight with concern. Species demonstrates ability to adapt tactical doctrine in real time during active combat. Improvement rate suggests exponential development rather than linear progression. The HFY Queen Admiral, recognizing that her forces were being systematically dismantled, ordered a desperate gambit. All remaining ships would converge on the human command carrier and destroy it through sheer overwhelming force. Without central coordination, the drone swarms would presumably become manageable. It was exactly what Admiral Chun had been waiting for. The HFY fleet, drawn into a massive formation focused on a single target, exposed itself to the kind of coordinated assault the humans had been perfecting. Every drone in the system received simultaneous targeting data for the most critical systems on every enemy ship. The attack that followed lasted exactly 47 seconds. Thousands of small explosions bloomed simultaneously throughout the HFY formation as drones struck ammunition storage, power cores, bridge sections, and engine clusters with surgical precision. The insects had concentrated their forces to deliver a knockout blow, but in doing so they created a target-rich environment where maximum damage could be inflicted before they could disperse again. When the explosions faded, the HFY invasion fleet had ceased to exist as an organized force. Scattered survivors fled toward the outer system, but automated human units pursued them relentlessly. No ship that had participated in the slave trade would be allowed to escape and rebuild. The orbital defense platforms that had protected the Centauri worlds for decades fell within the next 6 hours. Human drones swarmed over the installations like antibodies attacking an infection, systematically eliminating weapons, shields, and command centers until only empty metal structures remained. Then came the part that truly demonstrated how much human military doctrine had evolved since the Zephyrian conflict. The massive human carrier that had seemed so vulnerable during the fleet engagement revealed its true purpose. The ship wasn't just a command center for drone operations. It was a mobile invasion platform designed for planetary liberation campaigns. From its holds emerged not more drones, but something far more sophisticated, automated construction systems that began building orbital elevators, communication networks, and industrial facilities. Within hours, the humans had established complete infrastructure around every inhabited world in the system. But they didn't occupy the planets. Instead, Admiral Chun transmitted a message to every surviving population. The HFY slavery system has been permanently eliminated from this sector, she announced. All subjugated species are now free to determine their own governments and futures. Human forces will maintain a security presence until stable local authorities can be established. Any requests for continued protection or alliance will be considered favorably. Zektheri realized she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans hadn't just defeated the HFY militarily. They'd liberated an entire star system and established the infrastructure necessary for newly freed populations to rebuild their civilizations. Human strategic doctrine extends beyond tactical victory to comprehensive social reconstruction, she recorded. Species demonstrates capability for rapid establishment of governmental and economic systems in conquered territory. The implications were staggering. Most species conquered territory to expand their own population or harvest resources. The humans conquered territory to free other species and help them rebuild. They were spreading freedom the same way the HFY had spread slavery, through overwhelming military force followed by systematic transformation of existing social structures. Over the following weeks, Zektheri observed the human occupation force as they worked to establish new governments among the liberated populations. The process was remarkably efficient, but also remarkably respectful of local customs and preferences. Human advisors offered technical assistance and military protection, but They didn't impose Earth culture or political systems on the freed worlds. Instead, they helped each species develop governmental structures based on their own values and social organization. The only non-negotiable requirements were abolition of slavery, establishment of basic civil rights, and agreement not to engage in aggressive warfare against neighboring systems. Human liberation doctrine appears designed for sustainable long-term stability rather than short-term resource extraction, she noted. Occupied populations demonstrating high levels of cooperation and support for human presence. But what truly impressed Zektheri was the humans' preparation for inevitable retaliation. The Hive-Nesh had ruled this region of space for over 2 centuries. Their core worlds would certainly attempt to reclaim their lost territory and restore their slave empire. The humans were already planning for that conflict. Construction drones worked around the clock to establish defensive installations throughout the system. But these weren't traditional static fortifications. Instead, the humans built mobile platforms that could be rapidly deployed to any threatened location. They created a flexible defense network that could adapt to different attack vectors without requiring massive fixed investments. More importantly, they began training local defense forces among the liberated populations. Human military advisors worked with volunteers from every freed species, teaching them how to operate advanced weapon systems and coordinate with human forces during future battles. Humans implementing comprehensive military integration with allied populations, Zektheri observed. Training programs suggest intention to create unified defense force rather than dependent client states. The message was clear. The humans weren't just protecting these worlds temporarily. They were building a permanent military alliance that would be strong enough to resist any future Hive-Nesh resurgence. As her observation period drew to a close, Zektheri found herself contemplating the broader implications of what she'd witnessed. The human military wasn't just effective. It was transformative. Everywhere they deployed, they left behind stronger, freer, better defended populations. They were spreading human values through military victory, but those values included freedom, self-determination, and mutual cooperation rather than human dominance. It was conquest without subjugation, liberation through superior force. Final assessment. She spoke into her recorder. Human military doctrine represents fundamental paradigm shift in galactic warfare. Species combines tactical superiority with strategic vision that extends beyond traditional concepts of victory and defeat. Recommendation. Immediate council review of all military assumptions and defensive preparations. She paused, looking at the peaceful scenes playing out on liberated worlds where former slaves were learning to govern themselves under human protection. Personal note. I was commanded to observe humans at war. I have now observed them in both defensive and offensive operations. My previous concerns about human military capabilities have proven inadequate. This species doesn't just win wars. They transform entire regions of space through the application of military force guided by moral principles. The observation post began powering down as Zektheri prepared her departure. But she knew this wouldn't be her last assignment watching human military operations. The council would want her to study their next campaign and their next, because everyone knew the humans were just getting started. 6 standard months had passed since the Centauri liberation, and Zektheri found herself aboard a council observation vessel following the human fleet toward the core systems. The assignment that was supposed to be temporary had become permanent. The Council Military Assessment Division had restructured itself around studying human warfare, and she was now senior observer for human military operations, a position that hadn't existed a year ago. The humans were responding to a crisis that had the entire Galactic Council paralyzed with indecision. The ancient void touched, a species so old that their origins predated recorded galactic history, had emerged from the dark space between galaxies with a simple message. Surrender your technological species to our harvest, or watch your civilizations burn. For 3,000 years, the void touched had been myths and legends, stories told to frighten young council members about the dangers of deep space exploration. Now they were very real, and their ships were systematically destroying entire star systems to demonstrate their power. The council had held emergency sessions for weeks without reaching any consensus for response. The void touched possessed technology that made normal galactic defenses meaningless. Their ships moved through space-time like it was merely a suggestion. Their weapons could ignite stars or freeze them solid. Their shields rendered entire planets invisible to all known sensor technology. Most terrifying was their apparent immunity to conventional military doctrine. The Void-Touched didn't fight battles. They simply erased opposition from existence. 3 major council fleets had attempted to engage them. All 3 had vanished without sending a single distress signal. When Admiral Chun requested permission to investigate the threat, the council had tried to refuse. Losing humanity's increasingly important military capabilities to an impossible enemy served no strategic purpose. Better to hope the Void-Touched would be satisfied with harvesting other species and leave the humans alone. Chen's response had been predictably direct. We don't hide behind other people's suffering. If these monsters are threatening innocent populations, we'll stop them. The human fleet heading into the core systems represented everything they'd learned about warfare in the past year. 200 ships, ranging from massive strategic carriers to small stealth scouts. But, more importantly, they carried weapons and defensive systems developed specifically for dealing with enemies whose capabilities exceeded known scientific principles. Beginning observation log, day 212 post-initial contact. Zektheri recorded as the human fleet prepared to enter the Arcturus system, where the Void-Touched had established what appeared to be a staging area. Human force composition suggests comprehensive revision of technological capabilities since previous observations. The first indication that humans had developed entirely new approaches to warfare came as they prepared for battle. Instead of the coordinated fleet movements she'd observed before, the human ships began spreading out across enormous distances. Some vessels positioned themselves near the system's star. Others took up positions in the asteroid belt. Still others moved beyond the outer planets, creating a sphere of coverage that encompassed billions of cubic kilometers. But they weren't dispersing randomly. Each ship was connected to the others through quantum communication networks, but also through something else that Zektheri's instruments couldn't quite identify. The energy signatures suggested they were linking their power cores, their defensive systems, even their computational resources into a single massive array. Human fleet operations demonstrating unprecedented coordination protocols, she noted. Individual vessels appear to be functioning as components of distributed weapons platform rather than independent combat units. When the Void-Touched emerged from whatever dimension they used for travel, Zektheri immediately understood why 3 council fleets had vanished without trace. The alien ships didn't exist in normal spacetime. They flickered in and out of reality like shadows, sometimes solid and targetable, sometimes insubstantial as ghosts. Their weapons fired from positions that changed constantly, making return fire impossible. More disturbing was their effect on local physics. Gravity fluctuated wildly around Void-Touched vessels. Time moved at different speeds in different areas of the battlefield. Light itself seemed to bend and twist, creating illusions that made accurate targeting impossible. The lead Void-Touched vessel, a crystalline structure the size of a small moon, opened communications using frequencies that shouldn't have been able to propagate through normal space. Young species. The alien voice resonated with harmonics that seemed to bypass Zektheri's translator and speak directly to her mind. We have watched your recent conflicts. Your military developments show promise. Join us willingly, and your integration into our collective will be gentle. Admiral Chen's response came from every human ship simultaneously, their quantum-linked communication systems speaking with a single unified voice. We've seen what you did to the Rigel.